Welcome to Bruce Hurwitz Presents Meet the Experts. I'm your host, Bruce Hurwitz of Hurwitz Strategic Staffing. You can find me on the web at hsstaffing.com. I hope you will consider us for all your staffing, career counseling, and speech writing needs. I am delighted to be joined today by Nancy Miller. We will be discussing employment of people who are blind. Meet the Experts is sponsored by P&K CPAs. P&K is a full-service accounting firm. They provide accounting and consulting services to businesses ranging from startups to small and mid-cap companies to nonprofits as well as high-net-worth individuals. Contact them today for a free consultation at pk-cpas.com or call them at 973-882-8810. They will be happy to be of service. Nancy, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Bruce. Thank you for inviting me.
Well, it is my pleasure. Please take a moment or two and introduce yourself to our viewers.
Sure. So I'm the Executive Director, CEO of VisionServe for the Blind and Visually Impaired. This is my 32nd year as CEO, and our free services are offered to people with vision loss and also people with multiple disabilities to enable them to be as independent as possible and to get into the workforce if that's their goal.
Well, I thank you for coming on, and this, I believe, will be our 4th or 5th interview. But it's the first video interview. We've only done audio. So now I can see you smile. I don't know if you were smiling the other times. And my serious question, because our topic is about employment, and as a career counselor and recruiter, this is near and dear to my heart. I can see you now. In the past, I only had your tone of voice to know if we were in sync, if there was a problem. When you would stop speaking, I didn't know if you were at the end of your thought or if you had to stop to swallow or to take a breath. Mm-hmm. I had no indication of how you were feeling other than what I heard. So when a blind or visually impaired person is on a job interview, they're in the same situation that I was previously. They have to go by tone of voice. They don't have the benefit of seeing the other person's body language, which is extremely important in an interview. And they also have to be aware of their body language. So can you address this issue of the unique situation that a blind person is in when interviewing for a job?
Sure. So some of the skills that an applicant for a job needs in a job interview are exactly the same for a blind person as a sighted person, but they will do it differently. As you explained, they may not be able to see the person who's doing the interview, but they're actually able to pick up quite a few clues as to what the interview is going to be like. You can get a sense of how tall the person is. You can get a sense of whether or not they're distracted by the pacing of their speech, their asking questions. The biggest problem for job applicants is that often job interviewers talk too much. They love to talk about the work, the place that they work for, almost as if they're trying to convince you before you even know whether or not it's a good match. They're very egocentric. A good interviewer will ask job-related questions, and a blind person is just as capable of answering those as a sighted person. So when we train job applicants to prepare for an interview, number one, we say, ask the interviewer what are you looking for? Instead of getting the interviewer involved in the whole history of the company, get down to actually why they're there in the interview and let the job applicant help direct the conversation to how they can help the company based on the match with the job description or the tasks or the abilities that were in the job description in the first place. There's a reason that person was called in. It's because the employer thought there was a possible match. Now it's up to the blind person or any job applicant to get that interviewer to focus on it. The other thing we teach is many people, the minute they discover that somebody has a disability, are immediately uncomfortable. They're fearful, they have misconceptions, they think they're going to say the wrong thing. Somebody will say, well, I'd like you to see, oh, I didn't mean see, and they get so distracted by trying to be politically correct. And we teach people how to calm the interviewer down, how to make the interviewer comfortable by just giving a few tips. Oh, I don't mind if you use the word see, it's common language. Don't worry about it. It won't offend me. Or I know I may be the first blind person that you've ever met. If you have a question about how I'm going to do this job, please ask me. I am happy to tell you the accommodations I use or the accessibility technology that I use that will make me a great fit for what you're working for. It's a lot of work on the part of the applicant, but if they can get that interviewer to relax and do the interview just as they would with a sighted person, they have a much, much better chance of getting hired, because no interviewer, no HR representative is going to want to bring in somebody who makes them feel uncomfortable.
I agree with almost everything you said. But when you mentioned that interviewers sometimes talk too much, you're absolutely correct, but that can work to the benefit of the candidate, of the applicant, because they're going to tell them, I don't think it's an ego thing, I think it's desperation. They want a body in the chair. They're fed up. The hiring process is horrible. They want the body in the chair. And they want to hire that person, so they're selling the company. They're marketing their company. You want to work here. It's a great place to work. And then they're going to, because they're talking too much, they're going to say what they want the applicant, what they want to hear from the applicant. So the example I always use, which is very simple, is if they're talking about, let's just say it's a sales position for real estate, and they're talking about their problems with building up their commercial real estate portfolio. And then when they finish their long drawn-out soliloquy, they say, so tell me about your business development experience, and the candidate wasn't listening, and they focus on their residential experience. So then you have a disconnect, and you're not getting the job. So sometimes a talkative interviewer can be a blessing to an applicant. But
so for blind applicants tend to have, and we teach it, it's something you have to practice, are very good listeners. And yes, they are able to listen to what somebody is saying and then use what they've heard to then reflect back on, well, you mentioned this, here is how I can help solve that problem, or whatever the conversation has brought up. Again, if somebody's very nervous in a situation, whether it's the interviewer or the applicant, they either tend to be very quiet or they tend to be very talkative. And so it is upon the blind applicant to either draw out the person or to try to connect what they're saying to the purpose of the interview. We've had so many situations where the interviewer is so interested in blindness that the whole interview is around how does that blind person do what they need to do? Well, how do you get around New York City? And what kind of transportation do you use? And are you married? And where did you go to school? And how did you graduate? And again, the blind person needs to connect it back to the job interview. Still answer the question politely, but say, yes, I went to MIT and I got a degree in technology, and here are all the certifications I have, and I'm able to use the same kind of software that you would use. I'm excellent at Microsoft or whatever their skill set is. But we have to train the applicant because they're nervous. And so they may get to a point of just listening and then not using the information that the interviewer has shared. So it's trying to make a better match between the interviewer and the applicant, which is really what job interviews are all about. Will this person fit into my culture at my organization or company? And will they be able to do the job in a way that isn't going to make it harder for me?
I like how you said culture first, because that's really the key. Now, you were kind enough to share or to provide some slides, and I want to share them with our viewers. Oops, wrong direction. Here we go. So, talk to us about these key points regarding employment of persons with disabilities.
So some of you may have read an article written by Ted Kennedy Jr. in the New York Times on December 27th of this year. And the title of the article he wrote was "Hiring People with Disabilities is Good for Business." And in it, he shared information from a very recent research project about all the positives that companies have that have diversified their workforce to include people with disabilities. Very specific metrics. Revenues were 28% higher. Net income was 200% higher. Profit margins were 30% higher. Inclusion made it 4 times more likely that shareholders would see higher returns. Now, this is bottom line. So why aren't more companies, whether they're for-profit or nonprofit, hiring people with disabilities when the research shows what a positive it is? And companies that are in the business of making a profit definitely want to do whatever is going to increase their bottom line. So if you look at the reasons why employers don't hire people with disabilities, some of it is just basic misinformation. I don't think a person with a disability can work as well or as hard or as efficiently or as safely, whatever the stereotype or misconception is, because if you haven't hired people with disabilities, you don't have the experience. Maybe you know a brother-in-law who happens to be disabled, who isn't a great employee, and then that colors your whole view. Or you just haven't ever met anybody in the workplace and you just don't know. So these misconceptions are one of the biggest issues. The second is that people really think that they're going to have to spend thousands of dollars to make it possible for a person with a disability or a person who is blind to be able to do a job.
That's actually what I wanted to focus on, because you said before accommodations.
Yes.
Someone who's not acquainted with the lingo might think you were referring to where they live. The law says that an employer has to make reasonable accommodations for a disabled person. So here you have down on your 4th bullet point, lack of accommodations. Most are modest cost or paid for through government sources.
So in the case of a person who is blind, who is getting help from Visions, we're funded through the New York State Commission for the Blind. The Commission for the Blind will pay for every workplace accommodation that a blind person needs in order to be hired. There is zero out-of-pocket cost for the employer, but the employer doesn't know that. So our job in doing this type of podcast, but also in general when we do informational presentations, is to let employers know the accommodations exist. They're out there. We've already solved so many problems about how a person with a disability will be able to do the job. They just do it differently. And it won't cost them anything to hire that person. So accommodations could be a software program that reads out loud a website or a document, and the blind person uses either listens to it through a headphone or listens to it on very low loudness volume. I can tell you, having worked with people who are blind for, almost my entire life, they can listen much more quickly than I can read. So in fact, they can get through a document much faster than I can, because with practice, you are able to teach yourself to read auditorially much more quickly than you can visually. So in many cases, a blind person using reading software is able to complete a task quicker than a sighted person. Technology levels the playing field, and we're fortunate that the technology has blossomed for people with disabilities and people who are blind in particular, that there's either an application or a software program or some other methodology to solve 99.9% of any problem that a blind person is going to face in the workplace.
One of the things you said in a previous interview that shocked me were the numbers. Tell our viewers how many disabled people there are in New York City and how many are unemployed.
So there are over 1 million people in New York City that identify as having a disability. There are about 29% of people with disabilities that report that they are employed. Now, they may be underemployed, and they may be only employed part-time when they want full-time work, but it's less than a third of people with disabilities are employed, and that compares with 75% of people without disabilities who are employed in the workforce.
So basically 71% of the disabled are unemployed.
Who want to work.
Who want to work.
Yes.
Understood.
Let's
move on, because I don't want to run out of time.
Sure.
So what works?
So what we've discovered, and certainly what Ted Kennedy reflected in the research, is those companies, for-profit and nonprofit, that are truly interested in a diverse and inclusive workforce, not only do better, but create an environment where it's very possible for a person who is blind or with another type of physical disability or intellectual disability, it's possible to create an environment where they can work successfully and help the company meet its goals. It's especially important that employers are open to learning about accommodations. It could be pretty cool to watch a blind person actually doing their job. And we offer employers opportunities to come and actually watch our blind trainees, our blind employees doing the work that they do. And the employers are often blown away by the speed, the accuracy, the positive outcomes that occur by having a diverse staff, because frankly, there are things that blind people can do better than sighted people. When we lost all power in a blackout, they helped everybody get out of the building. We couldn't, we had no idea how to find the door, how to get down the steps, and we had our blind staff lead us out safely. So looking at the fact that each of us has skills that we could use to depend on. So some of it is attitude and understanding why it's positive, but also seeking training. You know, people don't discover all the answers on their own. And the partnerships between those organizations that have expertise in all of the accommodations that are needed, employers should take advantage of those. Visions does it, but so do all our other nonprofit partners that are working to help more people with disabilities get employed. And here in New York City, but it's true around the country, you probably have 2 or 3 organizations, probably within your zip code, that would come out and give free training to your staff, or are offering employer trainings where you can come and see what the accommodations are. There are websites, there are federal websites that talk about job accommodations. You can watch a blind person do their work on a video on the internet, but you have to want to look for it. So we know the answers are out there, but we have to encourage the employers and especially the HR interviewers, but also the CEOs. I know as a CEO of a nonprofit, if I'm not 100% committed, my staff is not going to be. And so this message has to get out to the decision makers at businesses, at large companies. There are many companies now that are great working environments for people with disabilities, and they're honored all the time for the work they've done for inclusion of people of all different skill sets and backgrounds. Unfortunately, in the funding world, when you say diversity, people think only language and ethnicity. They forget about disability. And this was pointed out very poignantly by a disability advocate. And I can tell you the Ford Foundation apologized publicly for not having included disability in their diversity and equity platform. And they have now become one of the premier funders and presenters on the importance of including disability in diversity.
You mentioned something about watching blind people do their jobs.
Yes.
And I get it. But let's take it a step further. A blind person is hired, and then all of a sudden, okay, it's human nature. Your original reaction is, I want to see how this person is going to be able to do their job. They have special equipment. It's fascinating to watch. But there comes a point where, look, this is a human being. He's doing his job. Standing over him and watching him becomes a distraction. You can sense if you're blind or not when somebody is watching you. How do you end the fascination part and say, look, let the guy or gal just get on with their job. They can do it. You've seen the equipment. Now go do your job.
So you're talking about how do you establish a normal environment when somebody is presenting themselves as different. Now, I would say the same thing about a bald employee, that I might
Watch
get
it.
fascinated by somebody who doesn't have hair and want to talk to them about when did they decide not to wear a toupee, and all kinds of conversations about it. We each get fascinated by different things. What I can tell you is that if the company, if the culture is person first, find out about that person. Give that person an opportunity to talk about their family, their growing up, where they went to school, all the things that water cooler conversations occur about. Do they have a favorite team? Do they like theater? Whatever their particular interests are. I can tell you by experience, within a day, the novelty of blindness wears off, and you just decide, do you like the person or not?
You don't.
It's really about normalizing the fact that people are going to be different. They're going to look different. They're going to work differently. I happen to be very short, and I have to do things as a short person that make other people laugh. I need step stools. I'll call on a taller staff member to get a book off his shelf. But after the first or second time, people just ignore it. So I think your point is very well taken, that how do you make difference not a distraction? And I find the best way is to talk about it, is to just make it very open, make it very comfortable. And if people are really distracted, give them an hour where all they do is ask this person questions and watch what they do, and then say, okay, training is over, now let's get back to work.
Well, of course, I have to comment on your previous statement, and just for your edification, baldness is a sign of superior intellect and virility. In case you've never been told that before, you should know so you don't make any social faux pas. Nancy, as always, I thank you. You are so articulate and so knowledgeable. And that's what you represent a problem in today's employment environment.
Yes.
Nobody keeps a job for 30 years. It doesn't happen. And you lose out. Anyone can be replaced.
Sure. But
someone who's been working 10, 15, forget about 30 years, it's not the skill set. No, I mean, you won't be offended. There's someone else who can come in and be the CEO of Visions and do a very good job. But they won't have your knowledge of the history of the organization. And when an organization loses that historical perspective, they lose so much.
Well, thank you, Bruce. It's always a pleasure to talk with you, and we're working toward the same goals, so it's nice to have a comrade in the fight.
Well, it's my pleasure. I'm now going to show your contact information, and I thank you profusely again for having come on. I hope you will come on again.
I would be happy to.
I want to thank all of our viewers for watching, and as always, please keep focused on success.